Recorded at the Kitchen Studios. This is the Pencil Pushers Podcast.
Ladies and gentlemen, I am incredibly excited and honored to have this great group of people here surrounding this conversation. Last week, we lost a giant in the art industry, the animation industry specifically, the master, the titan, Richard Williams. I wanted to pull together a panel to hopefully just chat about the legacy that this man left behind. I am not in the animation field. I am an illustrator, a graphic designer. I am a lover of animation. This is what I wanted to do when I was a kid. Traditional animation has a very, very deep part of my heart. You cannot have that kind of love for the animation industry without knowing and falling in love with the work of Richard Williams. So when I heard of his passing, I was very sad, but at the same time, I felt like I have an opportunity now with the podcast to put this conversation together. So I'm very honored to have some esteemed guests here who we'll talk about here now. Together with us, we have Mr. Tony White, who is obviously an award-winning animator, author of multiple animation books like The Animators Workshop and The Animators Notebook, which is one of the most important books of the principles of animation. He's a teacher, a mentor, and a mensch, if I could potentially say.
Thank you for inviting me. I'll be anything you want, okay?
Excellent. We've also got Dean Kalman Lennert, was a personal friend of Richard Williams. He was a student of him. He's also an animator with 30 years of experience working on Nickelodeon's Doug, MTV's Beavis and Butthead, Ice Age, and many, many others. Dean, welcome.
Thank you. Glad to be invited.
Tara Donovan is here with us, who is also an employee at the Richard Williams studio back in the 90s. This is after he got that flush of cash after Roger Rabbit was completed. And so she is also a very, very hardworking animator in the industry right now. She worked on Thief and the Cobbler. She's worked on Justice League, Ice Age. She's also currently working with for Detective Pikachu. Tara, welcome.
Hello.
How are you?
I'm good.
Awesome. And then finally, we've got Kevin Schreck here, who's also a huge admirer of Richard Williams' work, so much so that he decided to create a documentary on one of the greatest films that was never fully completed. His film was called is called The Persistence of Vision. He is a young, talented filmmaker. He's currently working on a new movie called Inongo, which I believe is going to have some traditional animation in it as well. Is that right, Kevin?
Yeah, it's become this documentary animation hybrid. It'll have at least 10 minutes of original hand-drawn animation by a team of 6 talented young women. Yeah, we're very excited about what that may be. But now I guess in some ways I relate to Williams's quest even more now. And yes, hello.
Awesome. Welcome. I think it would be a good way to start this is to talk about Richard Williams and your connection with him. So perhaps, Tony, if you could, why don't you start off by telling us how you got into working with Richard and what was that like meeting him for the first time?
Sure. I mean, I'm probably the oldest one here, so I have the longest memories of that. And you guys can fill in the gaps after I finish, but I'm going to really date myself. I was head of design and color on the Jackson 5 TV series for that show. But I was very unhappy. I wanted to learn how to be an animator. I was doing everything but animation, and I just saw Richard Williams' film came out, Charge of the Light Brigade, and he did the titles for that, and it blew me away. And I said, I got to work for this guy. I want to learn animation from this guy. So cut a long story short, I wrote a letter to him and said, please, can I come and work for you? And he actually said, yeah, come over and show me your portfolio. And I showed him the portfolio. He totally loved it. And he said, I love your work. You're top of my list, but unfortunately, I don't have a job right now, but we'll get back to you. Year later, I got to try one more shot with Richard Williams, or it's the Canadian Film Board for me. I was just going to head over to Canada. And as it happens, I sent a letter on the day that my letter arrived. Somebody resigned in his studio. And he said, come over. Can you come over in an hour? An hour. We need you now. And they were doing Christmas Carol, the first Oscar he won, Christmas Carol. But to cut a long story short, I turned up on day one, the studio of my idol. I walked in. I said, I don't know what my job is. I don't know why I am, but I got a job here. And they said, oh, you're Richard Williams' personal assistant. He's asked for you to come and work with him. And so I ended up as his personal assistant for another 18 months. And that's how I started. Many stories after that, but I'll let somebody else have it.
It's amazing. It's amazing. How about you, Tara?
Well, I was going to Sheridan College. I was just the beginning of my journey, and I was in second year. We had a teacher who told us that Richard Williams was finally getting the money to finish his film he'd been working on for ages, and I kind of knew he was from Roger Rabbit, but I didn't know much about The Thief and the Cobbler. But they said everyone should submit their work if they want to go to England for a year and finish this film. So I thought, well, why not? And so I jetted off to London in November 1990 and quickly ended up to my neck in overtime and in betweens.
What was it like working there? I mean, obviously you were such a newbie at that point, right? So, I mean, what was it like getting to be in an animation studio as a working artist, but then also knowing that you had this incredible animator that was leading the project there?
I mean, it's kind of overwhelming, really.
Yeah. Did you get much interaction with him as well from the beginning?
Well, it's a very hierarchical structure animation, hand-drawn animation specifically. You have your senior animators, your top talent that would be leads, and then they would have assistants that would work directly with them, and then we have in-betweeners, sort of a little army of in-betweeners that would work for the assistants or directly for the animators. So it's a nice system, actually. It's a great one for developing talent, and it's almost like a built-in learning structure. So I it was sort of a trial by fire as well. You know, you come in, they hand you a scene photo. Like I literally stepped off a plane in Heathrow, got a taxi to Richard Williams. They handed me a scene folder, pulled out a chair and said, here's a pencil, get to work. And I'm so jet lagged. I think I had my guitar and stuff on my suitcase under my desk and worked a 10-hour day. That pretty much set the tone for the year. It was a very, very intense. But as for my impression of Richard Williams, I didn't come into it with this knowledge of him as this animation hero like some of the older, more experienced senior animators did, because I was so fresh in the industry. It took me a while to understand how everyone was so reverent of this man and how much they esteemed every word that came out of his mouth. And it was sort of, funnily enough, yesterday or the day before, my mom handed me a stack of letters that I wrote home from when I was at Richard Williams. I didn't get a chance to read them all, but one of them really made my memory kind of tweak. It was that when the boss would walk out the door to go and get a drink or something like that, people would sort of talk to each other and they would kind of share a joke or whatever. And then when you hear the door latch close, it was silence, pencil sharpeners, flipping paper, and no one spoke while he was in the room. We weren't really allowed to talk, and no one was supposed to be listening to music. Back in the day, we had our Walkmans, and we really weren't supposed to listen to them. But he had his Dixieland radio on all the time.
Wow. That's funny. It reminds me of that story that he's told where he was hanging around the Disney animation studio and he's hovering over his idol, Milt Kahl, and he asks him what kind of music he listens to while he animates. And he gets all angry and turns around and says, what does he say? Something like, I'm not smart enough to animate while listening to music.
That's
right.
It's
pretty funny. So now after that, everybody at the studio, nobody can listen to music.
Except for him in the middle of the room with his Dixieland playing, which is hilarious. And think about it, we all knew about his attitude. So when he wasn't right by your desk, people would have sort of one headphone on and we'd be listening to something. And then if he came around, you'd just kind of pretend you weren't listening to him.
Right.
It was an amazing experience. It was completely overwhelming. And, I'm glad I didn't know more about it going into it because it was quite daunting. Met some amazing people, some fantastic animators that I would love to call out. But I learned so much that year. And it was very, very intense.
Mm-hmm. And how about you, Dean?
It actually started with, I took the master class, as many hundreds of people have. I spoke with Mo a lot. I don't really think I had a conversation with Dick when I was at the master class because I was like, I don't know what his temperament is. I had no idea what to expect in speaking with him. So I was like, let's just admire from a distance.
For those who don't know, Mo is Richard's wife, who was basically his muse for the last, I guess, 20 years or so, 25 years they were together. How long?
Yeah, probably 30 years. Which was funny because when I was speaking with Mo, who was the person you called to pay for the ticket to get into the master class, I didn't realize that she was Dick's wife. So I thought somebody working in the office or whatever. Right. My first experience with the master class just blew my mind. I just felt like I'd studied animation for years. I'd been working as an animator and understood all this stuff, but just the way he put everything together, especially on that last day, just was like, oh, wow. So that's how it works.
Yeah.
And it completely changed my own working habits. So afterwards, I figured, well, I have their address because I sent a check there and everything else. So let me write a fan letter. And I mean, this is something I say to my students at NYU all the time is write fan letters to your heroes because you never know the response you'll get.
Yeah.
And so I sent it off, not expecting anything. It was more like a thank you note. And then a couple weeks later, I pick up the phone in my apartment and it's Mo. And she says, hi, Dean, it's Mo. Dick would like to speak with you. And I'm like,
wow.
Oh, okay. And I cover the receiver and I look at my wife, Nancy, and I say, Dick Williams wants to speak with you on the phone. And so I get on the phone with him. I can't remember what the conversation was.
I bet.
But, he was, very grateful and like what I wrote in the note, which I don't remember what I wrote in the note. But then from there, I guess, I don't want to say got into his confidence, but I mean, he was somebody that the following year they did the recording at Blue Sky Studios for the masterclass. I became sort of the point person with that in terms of making sure that Dick got to the hotel at moments or, well, Dick is free this evening. Can you take him out to dinner? It's like, wow. Here's Richard Williams in this studio. And it's like, why isn't everybody kind of flooding to want to spend as much time with him as possible? It was a great opportunity to sort of ask questions that I had after the workshop. But for a good chunk of the time, asking about The Thief, which he referred to as that film, was you didn't go there.
Yeah. What year was this, by the way?
This is 98, 99.
Okay. Right.
And it probably wasn't until 2002 that I was able to ask him any questions about The Thief. And that was around the time that he showed it to Roy E. Disney. And Roy was making noise about, we have to finish this film for you.
Right. I heard about that.
I initially interviewed him and asked him questions about that, but then they requested that be cut from the interview. But I'd occasionally sneak in a question early on about The Thief, and it was usually met with a just flat response. But,
Yeah. So for those that aren't familiar, and again, I think it's important for me to let you guys know that this is not a podcast specific to animation. It is a podcast for the love of the hand-drawn art. So we talk about illustration, comic book art, hand lettering, animation, obviously. And it's good for us to talk a little bit about some of the details here. The Thief and the Cobbler was a movie that he was working on for probably over 30 years. It was his passion project. It was his magnum opus. It was the one that was that he was I guess you could say it was his coming out as being this creative force. And so unfortunately, he really, he lost the funding for it at the very end. So the film was taken away from him. And so this is why Richard really didn't want to talk about it very much, I'm sure, which we can talk a little bit about. And in lieu of that, I think that's a great segue to Kevin. Now, you are not specifically an animator, but I'm very fascinated by how you became, as not being an animator necessarily, how you became so enamored by this story and Richard Williams as a whole. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. Well, it's funny because I was actually kind of dabbling in animation when that kind of came on my radar. Obviously, as a kid, I saw Who Framed Roger Rabbit. That was very formative as a 3-year-old. Then as a teenager, I was trying out some stop motion stuff. I knew that I couldn't make something as good as what the folks at Aardman were doing, or like what you'd see on a Tim Burton movie or Ray Harryhausen stuff or whatever. But I wanted it to be something watchable, and so I would ask these animators. I somehow sent like emails to people in like DreamWorks and got in touch with them, and every person I asked this question to, how do I do this stuff? How do I become an animator? And every single one of them said, get this book by this guy named Richard Williams. And the book had just come out. It had been out for maybe, I think, less than a year. This was the early 2000s. And already it was the go-to tome. It was the book on how to animate at that point. And for a lot of people, it still remains to be. There are a lot of other fantastic books, including ones that Tony has written. But for a lot of people, that's like their like sacred tome. It helped tremendously. I learned how to do lip sync. I learned how to do takes. I learned how to do timing. I learned how to do overlapping action. It was very crude stuff for a 15 or 16-year-old with clay and feeble wire armatures, but it was definitely better than it would have been if I was just shooting in the dark. And I was like, well, this guy knows his stuff, but how come I only know him from Who Framed Roger Rabbit? Because ignorant, teenage me, I'm thinking, well, if you're a really important filmmaker or whatever, you got a huge list of credits. There's a bunch of things you've directed and stuff like that, or at least produced or whatever. And he mostly had commercials and things. And but he knew his stuff, so whatever. Fast forward, I'm just entering college, and like a friend of mine there, he said, oh, have I got something for you? It's this supposed lost epic of animation, this like greatest animated movie that was never made sort of thing. And I was like, well, I got to see this. It was this fan edit, this recobbled cut that was up on Google Video, which was, if anyone remembers that, was like 360p at best. It was very low quality, very pixelated. And yet, in spite of all those technological limitations in the mid-2000s, I was blown away. I was just thinking, like, I could see what was the technology was. What it was trying to show, and also knowing that it was an incomplete film, but seeing what was there, I was like, well, this is really something. And that name stood out to me again. Richard Williams. I'd forgotten the name after all those years. I was like, why is that so familiar? And so I dug into it. It's like, well, he's also associated with that book, The Animator Survival Kit. Well, how come I haven't heard of this thing, this Thief and the Cobbler thing before? And so I did a little bit more Google searching, and I realized, oh, well, that's the reason why he didn't have a huge filmography of feature after feature after feature. It's because instead of a 30-year filmography where he was working on numerous major films, he spent almost a 30-year period working essentially on one giant passion project. And that's when I was like, okay, there's so much beauty and tragedy and detail and sophistication and just grandeur to the film that he was working on. But I found even more beauty and tragedy and grandeur and I don't know, just it sounds pretentious, but almost an operatic kind of story.
It is.
The story of the behind the making of the film. It had that structure of an opera or something. Yeah. But it was a guy who made cartoons, and I was like, well, this is a really riveting story. And I thought, this would be a great documentary to watch, because I was thinking of it as a consumer rather than as a creator. Like, I'd love to see a movie about this. I want to see it, but I'm definitely not going to make it. I can't make it. I told myself that. And I told myself that for over 2 years, actually. And then I had a gig at DreamWorks Animation. I spoke with some people there, and I guess I've been thinking about this thing about The Thief and the Cobbler and Richard Williams, and it was just a passing remark. But the animator I was speaking with, it was actually Steve Hickner, who was a director there. He said, you see, now that's an interesting story. He worked on Roger Rabbit, by the way, Hickner. So he definitely knew Richard Williams. He was like, see, that's an interesting story. That is a character. It has a clear arc. It has a trajectory. It has, all these questions that adds up. There's a lot of nuance. That's a really good character-motivated story. So let's try to find that for whatever you're going to work on. And then I realized, wait a minute, why don't I just make that movie? And I took a stab at it. It was at first a student project. And then some people told me, after I finished that student work and got the grade, they said, we didn't want to give you a big head, but this is like actually good.
Yeah. And it really is a great, it really is a great
you might
film.
Want to take this somewhere, like festivals. And I was like, I rolled my eyes and said, all right, fine, what have I got to lose? A few submission fees, whatever. And then it snowballed. And then here I am now. So it's been very humbling and surreal.
Yeah, that's amazing. I've always wondered what it's like to be around these kinds of giants. And Tony, what was he like as a boss, let's say? What was it like working under him as a human being? Like,
I think you could ask everyone who worked with us at that time will give you a different viewpoint of what it was like working for him. But I was really lucky. I was in the back room, in his back room in 13 Soho Square. He was actually working on The Thief all the time. It wasn't financed, it was self-financed. And his whole philosophy was make commercials. Let's make the best commercials in the world and take all that money and pour it into The Thief. Pour it in. I want you guys to be the greatest feature animated team that's out there, because remember, in those days Disney was pretty much in decline.
Yep.
So what Dick always wanted to do, and the reason he took on for instance the Return of the Pink Panther titles, he said, I want to out animate Hollywood. I want to show them that we can do it. But his whole brief to us was, as British people, most of us were British, he said the British are probably the best designers, best storytellers, but they're crap at animation. They don't know how to animate. And I would argue that point still to some degree. I love British animation. I love people, but there's more interest in design and storytelling than there is in the actual technique of movement.
Right.
And so what he did, and I was in this unique position. He said, I'm going to get the people who really know how to animate over to London, and they're going to teach you. So we got Ken Harris from Warner Brothers, Bugs Bunny Roadrunner, the best guy, most wonderful guy. He would come, he was retired, but Dick would bring him over and we'd sit around once a day and go to a lecture. But I was especially lucky because he assigned me as as Ken's personal assistant or apprentice.
Yeah.
And my job was to pick Ken's brain, work with him day in, day out, pick his brain and share the secrets of Warner Brothers animation with the rest of the studio. And he did a similar thing with Art Babbitt from Disney, the 10th old man of animation. Yeah. And we all took Art's masterclass there. And then and Dick was obsessive. If you want to know what it was like, it was obsession, but it was a wonderful obsession. At the end of 5 years of me being there, it was about 5.5 years, we were all really realistic, saying, when's this movie going to come?
Right.
We're making all this sacrifice because we were pouring through commercials and I don't think this is reported anywhere, but in the area of advertising, which was around 90% income, we actually won more awards worldwide for our commercials than pretty much all the other studios put together, all the Western world studios put together. For a number of years, we just won award after award after award. And there was this huge anticipation of when are they going to make the movie, you know, and it started coming into us.
So I'm curious, Tony, because, you know, you were in the room with him. I mean, was he just a one-track mind of just literally getting the work done? Or, you know, what was... Well, I mean, was he? Tara's laughing here. I mean, what was he like just outside of animation? I mean, was he constantly on a mission or what?
Let me describe it this way. Everything I'm saying is totally set in admiration and in awe. This man was my idol, and he still is my idol as an animator. But at the end of that, he wasn't a good time and business manager. He was a genius artist, genius animator, had struggles communicating as the director, but he was not a businessman. Tara's laughing, I can see that. So I think you probably agrees with that.
Oh.
Yeah, please, let's...
When I joined it, I joined it about 5 months out. When he said, I need you now, he really meant that. He was 5 months out from the delivery, and they were about 8 months behind schedule. And the delivery was important.
Tara, I'm very curious as to what you're giggling about over there.
My brain's going in a lot of directions. So he was very singularly focused on animation. He was obsessed with animation, but he could not help himself. He was a master storyteller, and if he got your ear, you could be there for an hour. You never knew how long the story was going to go. It was the best thing ever when you're just, just minding your own business, shooting something at the line tester, and you'd hear him coming, because he'd be like, you could hear his very distinctive voice, and he'd be like, oh, hey, that thing you're doing reminds me of a story. Did I ever tell you? And he would go into the full regalia with all the voices, and, you'd be eating a snack, he'd start eating your snack. And he would just be showing like a one-man show. It was mesmerizing. And then he would just finish the story and everyone would laugh, and then he would just go back to his desk and keep working. And it was just, those moments were very golden, because it was very hard work. And when I said 10 hours a day, I mean, we started with 10 hours a day. We were doing a 7-day week, and it was real hard work. But as a boss, he was such a character. He could probably do an imitation of anyone he's ever worked with. And he's met everyone, and he's been everywhere. So he told a lot of stories that were, I don't know, it would just kind of brighten your day and keep the mood jovial when it was very, very intense most of the time.
Dean, you were not, you didn't work under him specifically, correct? You were largely, you took his classes, and then you largely developed a friendship with him. So this is kind of a little bit more of an aside of like, you got to actually be with him when he wasn't necessarily in the studio.
Yeah, I mean, that was one of the things I always looked at, was like, part of me always thought it would be really great to have worked with him, but another part felt like sometimes it may be nicer to just hear the stories and not have the pressure. And there's a great quote in John Kingmaker's book about the making of Raggedy Ann and Andy, where he talks about, I think John asked him how he approaches working with animators, and he said, I find their Achilles heel and I spend the day kicking at it. And it just,
it sounds like a kung fu master that would do that to their students,
Yeah, I mean, you had to obviously rise to the occasion, or you weren't, you were, Tony or Terry, you could probably speak to this more, or you were out the door. So with, anytime I had a chance to get together with him, it was just a matter of getting him talking. Occasionally, I'd come in and ask specific questions about things, but it wasn't, it was just a lot of stories. And, in teaching, there's a lot of times I'll repeat the stories, and half the time I'm like, should I tell that one? Shouldn't I tell that one? Because he doesn't have a filter on him when he's like that. No. And
you just made me smile, because I once met Eric Goldberg, who was also part of our team in those days.
That's right. Yeah.
In London. And we met at the Kalamazoo Animation Festival. We had dinner together, and we were talking about the old days and the stories of Dick and everything. Eric said at the time he was working on a biography of Chuck Jones. And I just said jokingly, oh, and how about the next one being the biography of Richard Williams? And he said, Tony, I can't do it. We couldn't afford the lawyers.
Oh, wow.
Because there are stories. I mean, he's the most amazing kaleidoscope, chameleon of human beings, or he was, still is, in my opinion.
Yep.
There are stories that cannot be told, and there's stories that should be told and shouted from the rooftops.
Well, speaking of lawyers, there was a little anecdote about the cover of the Animator Survival Kit, where you have, sort of characters that you recognize, and then all of a sudden there's this rabbit, producer with a script for Rabbit Wars. And originally what he wanted to do, he's very grateful to Chris Wedge for allowing him to shoot the masterclass at Blue Sky Studios. He wanted to put Bunny, Chris's character, on the cover of the book as a thank you. And so Chris was like, hey, Dean, can you do me a favor and get some nice images of Bunny and send them to Dick, because he's going to put Bunny on the cover. So I was like, okay, great. So I got everything, sent it out to Dick, and didn't hear anything back. And I was like, well, hopefully, I just want to make sure that the images work. So I called him up and I said, were the images okay? Do you need higher resolution stuff? I can have somebody render some stuff out in any pose you want. Oh, that I'm not using Bunny on the cover. I said, why? He said, well, Fox contacted me, and they started asking me about what other characters are going to be on the cover of the book, who is it going to be next to, which character is going to be big. So I was like, the hell with it. So that's why the rabbit is drawn as a producer with a script
Wow.
under his arm there.
Wow. Kevin, I was actually looking at your documentary again yesterday as I was doing a little bit of preparing for today. And something struck me that was kind of interesting. You know, you were talking about this idea of like not doing very well with deadlines. And it's interesting because he made thousands and thousands of commercials. It seemed like traditionally when it came to client constraints, he actually succeeded very well in accomplishing, finishing many, many projects for clients. But when it came to his own work, that's where he started to struggle. And as I was watching the documentary on the thief, I started to think about, was that one battle scene, right? And the whole time while everything is collapsing, there's this giant battle going on. The thief is there completely focused on that golden prize. And in some ways, I feel like for Richard, his craft was the golden prize. In the midst of all the stuff that was going on with these monumental film that he was trying to put together, it was really, as there was a part in the film where you see Richard actually talking about how much craft was put into this and that it was so rare for this to be done these days. And so I wonder, did you guys feel that way too? Did you see that passion that he was so focused? Because there were certain parts where he talked about, or some of the staff was talking about how there were scenes that would wind up being so good that he would start extending them. So they were originally like, a minute long, like the guy who was dying by the horse. It was only supposed to be like 10, 15 seconds, and he loved it so much that he turned it into like a 3-minute scene. It seemed like he was just obsessed with the craft itself, and that was almost sort of the Achilles heel, I guess you could say, in him working on his own film. Would you guys agree with that as working with him?
Well, I'm the most removed from the man and his process and everything among the guest panelists, of course. But I did want to say before it's forgotten that while my documentary does not directly mention it, your observation about the sort of golden prize, which is that golden sphere minaret, is a very interesting one. Again, it's not mentioned in my documentary. It was on some cutting room floor deleted interview footage, though, that more than one of my interviewees very confidently said, "Oh yeah, by the way, the thief, it's a self-caricature. It's draws himself. It is Richard Williams." So it does bring a whole. Is that merely like a joke, or is there something more going on? I don't want to get all like Werner Herzog on this whole thing, but it's like, what is he saying, or what is he getting at, whether intentional or otherwise? At the very least, it's a funny drawing, but maybe there's more to it.
Yeah, my feeling with his work, I mean, he took everything that from these other master animators in terms of knowledge and just was like, okay, well, let's see how we can up that. How can we push that? He talked one point about, well, we can do a double bounce. What about a triple bounce? What about a quadruple bounce? And he would do stuff until it would fail. And then he would just sort of keep on pushing it to see, well, how can we, it's the whole idea of like, you have to destroy something in order to create it. And he wanted to fully understand, what was possible with animation. And honestly, I don't think that the word can't was ever in his vocabulary for what could be done in animation, because everybody, I mean, when they started doing Roger Rabbit, everybody said, you got to lock off the camera. And he was like, no, you don't have to lock off the camera because it's just a bunch of goddamn lazy animators who, in the past would choose not to move the camera.
Yeah. Tony, did you have something to say about that?
Yeah, it's more of a general point about him, but I'll lead into it by saying in the London studio, in the basement was our theatre. And every morning we'd go into the theatre and look at rushes, or they're known as dailies in the US. And we'd sit there, and it was really interesting. Of course, I was the naive kid that came in at the beginning, but once you'd been there a while, you saw the other naive newbies come in. And Dick would always say, Disney, they always have, everyone contributes, everyone makes an opinion, everyone talks about what they see on the screen and they share ideas. The old men, they always tell each other and help each other, and it's competitive, it's helpful and everything. So speak up, speak up.
Mm-hmm.
And as I say, the newbies would speak up. But us old guys realized you don't speak up, because the minute you did, he'd jump down your throat. He'd always have a counter argument. There'd always be something. And I have to, I think his time management thing I spoke to is he had this incredible ability, or shall we say handicap, that he had this eye that could see things that nobody else could see. And let me illustrate that by saying we were in the dailies or rushes one morning, and there'd been a film that a scene that had been taken. It had taken about a week to film this thing. Remember, 35mm film in those days, no Photoshop, no After Effects, nothing like that. All had to be in the camera pretty much all the time. The poor cameraman, he'd spent a week shooting it, and it came up on the screen, and our jaws dropped at the amazing work that came up on the screen. All except Dick. And he went, dirt, dirt, dirt. And we looked at him, what? Dirt, dirt, there's dirt on the film. And they said, there's no dirt. Play again, play again. So he made this whole thing be reran. And we'd all look at it. He said, watch down, bottom right-hand corner, dirt, dirt. And we'd all look, there it is, there it is. We didn't see it, okay? So we did as close as we could to argue with him. We said, we didn't see it, Dick. Oh, everyone out to the Moviola. And the Moviola, if you don't know, is an old film device for editing. You run the film through on frame by frame. And he got it to the frame, and he pointed to one frame in 24, and there was a speck of dirt on it. And he made them reshoot the whole thing because of that speck of dirt. But no one else saw.
It's a curse, not a blessing.
Tara, did you ever experience something like that?
Yes, I mean, I can definitely speak to that. I mean, just for people's background, in case, I mean, some of us are close to the film and would know this, but hand-drawn animation was not normally done on ones unless it was absolutely necessary. So, I mean, if you want something to look super smooth, you would do it on ones, but most of the time you try to cut a corner or two by every other frame.
Tara, can you explain what the difference is between animating on ones as opposed to like animating on twos like a normal studio would do?
Sure. So 24 frames of film make a second. And for most people's eyes, if you run the same image twice, you get 12 images in a second. It looks just as smooth, almost as smooth.
And most Disney animation was like that?
Most, yeah, I think so. Unless it was something like a moving camera, a pan would have to be on ones, or very specifically like something very fancy like very fast action, let's say. But Dick felt that everything had to be on ones for it to look smooth. And that meant even very slow action. So some of the in-betweens that we did, and we all got a good bunch of carpal tunnel syndrome doing it too, in very, very sharp, fine lines to try to split hairs and things that weren't actually really moving. And he would also demand tracebacks for every hold. So instead of just having something that was stopping, just replay that drawing, just leave it on the pegs and just shoot it over and over again. We would have to copy it and copy it and copy it so it would boil a tiny bit and look alive, but not boil too much, and then that would look bad. So at one point, I don't know if you guys have seen The Thief in the Cobbler section where there's like, you know, the balls are bouncing in the courtyard and there's all these people running around and chickens. So the chickens are about 1 millimeter high. They have little feathers coming off them. There's overturned carts with hay that there's tiny, so I worked on that. There's, well, with other people, of course, but all the little people wearing their little costumes, they're all like, you know, 1 millimeter to 2 millimeters tall. And we were in between them using giant paper, 16 field paper, even bigger, 32 field, with tiny, tiny pencils and a jeweler's magnifying glass to be able to see what we were doing. So it was just painstaking work, doing maybe 1 to 2 drawings a day, maybe 3 if you're lucky. I mean, it was just nuts, the detail that was in it. And the obsession that he had with this tiny, fine detail, making everything that could have been done so much easier with computers, but doing them by hand, such as, I'm sure you're aware, maybe you worked on the War Machine sequence, did you, Tony? With the scissors and tape and X-Acto knives and Xeroxing these elephants and pasting them all over. You know what I'm talking about. They all had little rivets and all this. It was so detailed. And he would always be adding and adding more of this kind of stuff. So instead of getting the film anywhere near being finished, he would come up with new ways to make it more difficult. Once we realized he wasn't going to actually be able to finish the film, and there was a day when it kind of went through the studio, people got calculators out, and we were like, okay, this is something else now. Then we all kind of relaxed, and we focused on the craft, making it as beautiful as Dick wanted it to be right near the end.
For people who don't know animation, in hand-drawn animation, usually the drawing and animation is done on paper, pencil and paper, tested in his studio, tested a million times till you get it right. But then he goes over to the inkers or the tracers. On the Christmas Carol, we didn't have that process. We had to draw with in those days, they were called audio-visual pencils. They had lead in them. They were lethal, but we used them to draw directly on cell. So we were animating directly on cell.
Yes.
During the summer when our hands were melting and the cells was greasy, but we had to get it perfect. And I remember for sure, it wasn't me, but one of the assistants, if anyone sees the Christmas Carol, you'll see that it's old, like 19th century engravings with multiple cross-hatching. Dick loved cross-hatching. And one of the in-betweeners did these in-betweens directly on cell, meticulously animated everything, showed it to Dick, and he went round every single drawing and counted the number of cross-hatchings. And he found that on most of them, there were 12 lines of cross-hatching in this area, and one of them had a couple that were different. And he threw the lot out, and they had to be re-in-betweened.
That sounds about right.
Obsession for detail. Because, he just raised the standard of the whole industry. Even if no one could emulate that insanity, it did raise the standard of the industry. And, Roger Rabbit would not have existed if it hadn't been like that prior to Roger Rabbit and beyond, and you wouldn't have that big War Machine sequence, which is totally insane, but one of the most amazing sequences ever created.
I'm curious to get your all of yours opinion on whether or not, if he had started this movie in 2019, do you guys think that he would have incorporated computer animation?
I don't know if he would have. I mean, for example, if you look at The Thief and the Cobbler, he didn't use Xerox on that. That was all, he was going back to like the golden age of animation. And some of those cells have, like, for example, Zigzag's rings. They're all self-lined, which means that the color isn't just a black color. It's a complementary color to the fill color in there. And Zigzag has 25 rings on his hand. He has an extra joint on every finger, and he has an extra finger in every hand.
Insane.
So, and each of those have a different slight color. So, in my opinion, I feel like if somebody said, "Hey, Dick, here's your budget. Here, make whatever film you want," I don't think he would opt for a computer.
Tony?
Yeah, I just say, just going back from my experience in those days, because I was in the back room, I kind of knew everything that was going on the business investor side. I saw many investors. I wasn't in on those meetings, but I knew they were going on, where investors from all over the world were trying to put money into his film, even in the Cobbler film. And I just remember one example, and this is to say no, he would not, as far as I know, would touch computers. Because he hated computers, he hated technology. And one of the investors from New York was in a meeting with him and said, "Yeah, Dick, we can invest in this film. We'll put the money in. The only thing I ask is that on the accounting side, we have to keep in check with this. So we'll put a computer in your office." And every day, maybe your assistant or your secretary can type in the costs, and they'll be via the wire to New York, and we'll just see. And he totally exploded and literally threw the guy out of the office because he didn't want a computer in his studio.
I don't think the accountants were allowed to use a computer when I was there.
What?
Yeah.
That might just be a crazy rumor, but I heard they had to use a ledger and calculators. That's how much he hated computers.
Yeah.
I would like to think that eventually someone would have gotten through to him for things like turning the city, which was all done manually, that long pan that goes over the hills, which I worked on, and it was very beautiful, very painstaking, but it would have been nice if we could have had maybe a basic computer fly-through model, and then when you did the in-betweens and the hand-drawn stuff over top, it would have been really solid, because the wobbliness was very hard to control. The way that they did on Iron Giant, I'm sure many of you have seen Iron Giant, like the robot was all CG and then hand-drawn on top. So that's why it looks super solid. They've done such beautiful work in TV paint at places like École Gobelin, where I don't know how anyone who is really interested in advancing the art form could turn their back on the beautiful painterly hand-drawn stuff that they're doing in computers now.
Especially, I guess, claws, they're doing some sort of new technique as well, right?
Absolutely, and that's kind of a 2.5D thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think if Richard Williams had the right person to kind of bring him around to computers, it would have been an enhancement of his medium instead of just fighting against the technology all the time.
Kevin, did you want to add something to that?
I never got the idea that he was a Luddite, anti-technology per se, but that as long as it was, I mean, the computers thing is interesting though. I've never seen a photograph of a computer in the studio during the early 90s. So maybe there is a strain of being anti-technology in there. But the fact that he wasn't doing Xeroxes, the fact that he wasn't using computer animation, which was available then, the fact that he wasn't using a system like CAPS that Disney was using by the early 90s to digitally paint the cells. I think it's less to do with being just a cranky old Luddite and more to do with the fact that he had this tremendous appreciation for the handcrafted arts. And that, like, he's not going to not use a blender or a toaster or something like that.
Right.
I mean, but if it's about drawing or animation or art, he wants it to come from a human hand. He wants that tactile quality. And Dean made a really interesting point about how he wanted to roll back the clock to the golden age. He's often said, Richard Williams has often said that he wanted to roll the clock back to 1940, which is when he felt that the 9 old men and the disgraced old men for political reasons, these old masters figured things out when they made Pinocchio. That was sort of his idea. From Snow White was a good jump start into feature-level animation. They really nailed character animation with Pinocchio, and then you had Fantasia and Bambi and Dumbo, etc., where they really got it with those 5 features. But if you look at the work he was able to do outside of a studio or without having to work with others and was just working solo, I'm mentioning in particular his last work, which is his Lysistrata-inspired piece, the piece that did come out, Prologue, which in my opinion is not just his masterwork, but a masterwork of the art form of animation itself. I mean, that's something that I'd love to see in a time capsule. Rather than going back to 1940, Williams said, I'm going back to 1900, where it's just a pencil, just paper, and just a camera. It's those 3 basic ingredients. And like some sort of a master chef or a sculptor or something like that, he wants to make this masterpiece just from the bare essentials that you need to make that. No computers, no ink even, no paint, no cells. It's just pencil to paper and camera. And one guy essentially doing it, like a little monk, like in the monastery, as was said earlier, on his own and polishing this little masterpiece. And thank goodness he was able to make that little piece of a masterpiece. And I think his wife and producer, Mo, Imogen Sutton, was very instrumental in that. I think she really told him, like, look, if you're going to make this masterwork, do it in pieces and release them as little shorts. And then if you ever are able to make some progress, you can string the ones you finished together. But at least you'll have one of them, hopefully. And he was able to finish one before he passed away at the age of 86. But this was an idea that he had that's way older than The Thief and the Cobbler, this Aristophanes-inspired piece. This was an idea that he had when he was 15 years old. What else happened when he was 15 years old? That's when he discovered Rembrandt, he discovered Da Vinci. And he was already a fan of animation as a kid because he saw Snow White, and his mother was an illustrator. But when he walked into a gallery at the age of 15 and he saw Rembrandt staring back at him, that's when he was like, oh, this is for me. This is when I really want to be a capital A artist. And he was that For 15, he dropped cartooning altogether. He was like, cartoons are stupid. I want to be a big kid. I want to do serious art. And then he was traveling around in that circus at age 20, 22 on the island of Ibiza near Spain, and realized when he was painting these circus performers and acrobats and animals and things that his drawings and paintings wanted to move. And that's when he realized at its most fundamental core, that's animation. It's making drawings move. And that's when he made that 180-degree turn back to animation and went to London and started working with the artists that were up there, started his studio in his, I guess, late 20s, like pretty young man. Mm-hmm. And it was always, always, always about the human hand bringing life into something, always about the drawing, ultimately.
You know what's fascinating about him, I think it was in the documentary, there's, I can't remember who it was that was being interviewed, but somebody was talking about this scene that Ken Harris was talking about, the master animator himself, Ken Harris, who, for those that aren't familiar with him, was one of basically the lead animator for the majority of Chuck Jones's films, where he's talking about how Ken Harris was almost a wreck working on this one scene. I think it was with one of the giants, or one of the
Salome sequence, which is one of the brigands.
Yes.
Who's opining for Salome and talking about his love or lust for her.
Right. And so he's toiling over the scene, and he was almost to the point of like breaking as he's handing over the scene and it's finally completed. And they were talking about how he was in his probably early 70s or something like that at the time. And we're talking about a master animator, Ken Harris, doing this. And fast forward to the 2000s, probably around 2014, 2015, Richard Williams is now announcing the release of Prologue. And he's talking about it feverishly, passionately, about how finally he got to this point where he's able to just put everything that he's learned, and now it's just all congealed, and he can do whatever he wants, right? And I think about this, he's in his 80s at this point, and I'm just completely fascinated by how incredibly passionate he was. It didn't seem like, especially when you look at his last film, Prologue, I mean, he wasn't slowing down. His talent was at the highest level possible. I mean, I was just blown away by that. I mean, when you see this film, I mean, as animators yourselves, I mean, what do you see? What's going through your mind when you're looking at that film, Dean?
I mean, it just those few opening images there with the bee inside I think there is a snapdragons. Is just amazing. He's probably one of the greatest students of the art form of animation. And I think in the 20 years that I knew him, there were at least 3 times that he would excitedly say, about this project, I finally understand this medium. I can finally pull all this stuff together and do this. And time would go by, and then he'd discover something else. He was always going back and always relearning things. And with Prologue, you see him just putting everything in there, everything that he's learned. The last question I asked him as he was leaving after visiting NYU was, there's a scene in The Thief and the Cobbler where the thief turns around and sees his own reflection in the polished marble there. And then, and it's a famous, great, classic animation take, pushed a little further. When I was watching Prologue, there's the scene where the guy thinks he's the last man standing and the wounded soldier on the ground puts the sword up and stabs him in the groin. And the reaction of that wounded soldier is the same timing as the thief. So I said to him, Dick, did Ken Harris animate that shot of the thief when he reacts? He said, oh yeah, no, there's a good chance that was just very matter-of-factly. So it was interesting watching this stuff that he had learned years ago, just sort of still with this beautiful polish and this beautiful, these beautifully rendered drawings still have these other things that he learned earlier in there. Amazing.
Tony, did you want to add to that?
Animation grabs you. You're either an obsessive or not. I'm in the set obsessive and was made so by Dick Williams. The body fails you. That's the problem. That's the problem with him. The body eventually does give up, and it's going to give up on all of us. And it's very sad because the vision and the knowledge and everything is still there. It reminds me of the beginning again, because I remember when we were in the studio, we were always working around the clock. It was insane. But there were moments where there was no work to do. I would say to Dick, what shall I do? Because there's nothing to do. He says, oh, get on the tiger, get on the tiger. And I said, what do you mean? What do you mean? And what he used to do, he had, in those days, Disney, it was all film. Disney had control of every single print of their movies. But he had somebody on the inside in Disney London who would sneak out the movies so that he could trace sequences from Disney. And what he meant by the tiger was from the Jungle Book. He said, did you see how Milt did that sequence? Go and trace it and learn. And yeah. I didn't have to, I loved doing it, but I had to get the back projection on the camera and just sit frame by frame drawing those pictures from Milt's animation, and then flip them, and then Dick would talk about it and say, look what he did there. The enthusiasm will never die, you know. I'm sure there's a big light box up there in the sky somewhere, and he's sitting at a drawing board. He's with Walt, and he's with, you know, the 9 old men. They're all plotting something, you know. Can't wait to get there, personally.
Tara, do you have a fond memory, but maybe a takeaway of your relationship that you had with working with him for that short time?
There were sort of two moments in my career that I think about a lot with his passing. And one was the moment that I went to No Frills, and in the cereal aisle saw that the movie came out in Fruit Loops box, where I saw like The Thief and the Cobbler DVD free as a giveaway, which I bought because, I mean, how could I not? And that was kind of a low moment as a young animator, thinking, well, all of that for nothing. And then there were two positive things that happened after that in my career. One was his book and his amazing seminars that he toured around the world. And I remember seeing him speak in front of live audiences and how people just flocked to him. And he just took all of this knowledge that he'd gleaned and shared it with the world. And the last little moment that I've been thinking about a lot is Kevin's film coming out, which helped frame the film. The fact that it didn't end well for him didn't mean that all of his work was for nothing. And Kevin really helped show the world what happened so that the facts are out there. And he wasn't just trying to make a ripoff of Aladdin, which some people did think until that documentary came out. So looking back, and I've been asked to reflect on his death recently, and it got me really thinking that his biggest legacy, aside from his great art, was the education that he provided many generations of animators. And I don't know if anybody remembers it this way, but I certainly do. At the dawn of CG animation, there was a giant rift between the hand-drawn animation that was kind of dying.
Right.
The classical era was ending, and the CG animation that was taking off with the dawn of Pixar, etc. These animators didn't talk to each other much, and there was a lot of disparaging remarks made back and forth. And Dick Williams brought us all together and gave us a body of knowledge and a dialogue that we could all share. And so that this whole generation, multi-generations of CG animators now refers to this book that he made, to these seminars that he taught. And the hand-drawn animation is revered again, and no matter what medium we work in. That's why it's so prophetic, the cover of that book having all these different styles on it. I mean, he's really unified the entire global animation community.
Yeah.
I don't think that's an overstatement at all.
No, I don't think so either. I mean, on the peripheral, as just an admirer of the animation industry, one of the things that I saw that he was, it seemed like there was a lot of intention with regard to the admiration of both traditional and computer animation, and he's trying to like build those bridges and saying that what these principles can do will enhance whatever animation field you're involved in. It doesn't matter. Does anybody want to have any closing statements before we close out here?
One of the stories that he told me was about Ken Harris's funeral. I believe that he was a pallbearer, but he was talking about when he was looking at Ken lying in the casket, and he looked at Ken's hands and he noted that just relaxed, Ken's hand was in a position where it looked like he could hold a pencil.
Hold a pencil.
And Dick for a moment just was like wanting to take the pencil out of his pocket and slide it
Yes,
in
that
there.
would be awesome.
And maybe put some paper in. And I kind of hope that somebody tucked a black wing in his pocket and maybe a little pad of paper with him. People outside the industry don't understand the influence he had. I mean, during the 60s and the 70s, he was, because he was elevating the art of doing commercials for television, people in New York were like losing business. Everything was going to Dick's studio. And it's my opinion that had it not been for The Thief and the Cobbler and the quality of the work in The Thief and the Cobbler, Disney would have been like on a decline. I really think that he, put the paddles to the heart of the art form and got the audiences excited by it again, because that's when Disney took off right after that. Because it was like, animation's exciting. And for the opening animation of Roger Rabbit, that cartoon, he was just putting so much work into that. And Zemeckis was like, don't do that. It doesn't need to be that great. And Dick was like, look, if this does not sell as a 1940s cartoon, the audience isn't going to believe the rest of the film. So he was taking his paycheck and hiring additional assistants to get it up to that level. It was this beautiful hybrid of Warner Brothers and Disney and that polish that the MGM cartoons had. Yeah. And historically throughout the industry, he's been like that. He's come into these key moments in time and just really challenged people without being there to directly challenge them. But they knew, we're going to lose business unless we get on the stick and start competing with this guy, who's not interacting with any of us. Yeah. So,
Tony, anything to add here as we close this out?
I remember, when I saw the news about Dick passing away, I saw it on Facebook, which was kind of cold in your face kind of thing. And I just remember tears just welling up in my eyes. And the only thing I could really say was thank you, because I would have that experience again in a heartbeat. I'm getting emotional now because it means so much to me. And even though I left his studio to start my own studio, there was a huge part of me still in that studio. And it was funny, even when I was making commercials and doing other things, really, truly, at the back of my mind, I wasn't worried if the clients approved everything. I would say, what would Dick make of this? Where should I fix this, Dick? What should I do? How can I improve this? And it's always been like that. He just I owe everything I know in animation to him, and I just thank him.
Yeah. Kevin, any final notes?
Well, I think it's interesting that you have this array of people that knew him over almost 50 years, really. And yet all four of these guests, including myself, and Tara, and Dean, and Tony, are all doing something today that somehow has Richard Williams' DNA infused into it.
Totally.
Whether we realize it or not, whether we like it or not, and I think we do like it, Tony summed it up in a far more elegant way than I am, which is simply thank you. Thank you for the legacy. And it's 86 years of amazing life and work, and then a potentially immortal legacy if we choose to keep that flame alight. And I think that these guests, Tara and Tony and Dean, are doing such a great job at doing that, at keeping that flame alight.
100% agree. That was wonderful. In my opinion, Richard Williams is the greatest animator of all time. He would probably never admit that. He is going to be sorely missed, but he's got a tremendous amount of influence and artistry that he's left behind for us. So thank you guys so much for being a part of this podcast. I really, really appreciate it. I know you guys are incredibly busy, and thank you for taking the time to be here with us. So I hope you guys have a great rest of your week, and hope to talk to you guys soon. Thank you so much.
Thank you for bringing us together.
All right.
Thank
Bye,
you.
everybody.
thank you.
You guys take care.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
All right, everybody. Thank you so much for listening to the Pencil Pushers podcast. follow us on Instagram at the Pencil Pushers Podcast for visual representation of our guest artwork, topics discussed, and anything else that contributes to the show. So be sure to subscribe, tell a friend, tell lots and lots of friends. Become a leadhead, and we're out.